T minus 20 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Welcome back, everybody. It is time once again for Out of the Tunnel here on the Jackwagon Sports Network. We took the week off last week. I traveled up to the App State Marshall game, and the Wi-Fi there was absolutely horrible, so there was no way for us to get the show out. But we're here. We're going to talk you guys through Week 11, get you ready for the week ahead. There's a lot of exciting games coming up today. We'll make sure we go over all those. But the biggest topic of all broke yesterday afternoon, and it is the fact that Jim Harbaugh got a 3-game sideline ban from the Big Ten, not the NCAA, um, but from the Big Ten. He will be banned from the sideline for the remaining 3 regular season games, not the Big Ten championship if they make it, and not the college football playoff if they make it. Um, so currently, Michigan is fighting this in court. They're trying to get an injunction to stop it, and so that way, he can still coach. As of right now, it does not look like that'll get through before the Penn State game today. We shall wait and see. We have our Twitter pulled up here. We're waiting for breaking news to come out on that, and we will keep an eye out on that. But we just want to give you our quick thoughts on the entire situation, and kind of talk through what we think this will mean for Michigan going forward. First and foremost, I think this is very, very hypocritical by the Big Ten. It'll be interesting to see what happens from here going forward. Um, Michigan has pleaded their case, and again, I don't feel like they're denying the fact that they have essentially cheated the system. They're more so trying to point the fact that this isn't as uncommon as what we think. Now, the question is at this point, I feel like, does Michigan, how far over did they overstep the line as compared to what other schools do? How far above and beyond, to steal the signs, videotape the sidelines, so on and so forth, did they go as compared to some of these other schools that they talk about? So that'll be interesting to see, and they have not necessarily threatened, but made it very clear that if a punishment came down, before all the facts were presented, Michigan was ready to expose even more evidence than what they already have. That this is not a isolated incident for the Wolverines, or other schools in the Big Ten, I should say. So again, it'll be very interesting to see what happens from here going forward. Um, but back to the hypocrisy of the Big Ten, again, they say that they're trying to do this in the interest of fairness, and they don't want to let teams have unfair advantages. And while I understand that, I don't think it's very fair to wait until the less than 24 hours before a huge game between Michigan and Penn State to come out and say, well, we're going to suspend the head coach of this team, the guy that has spent all week practicing with them, getting them ready, so on and so forth. Um, really, really curious to see how the rest of the situation is going to unfold and where everybody will go from here. We, of course, will keep you guys updated. But those are my thoughts. It's going to be a very interesting situation here in Happy Valley today with Michigan and Penn State playing. I will say, I think the one benefit Michigan will have with this sideline ban as compared to the 3-game suspension Harbaugh had at the beginning of the season, where he wasn't allowed to be at the facility at all, couldn't be at practices, couldn't recruit, so on and so forth. I'll be really curious to see, or I think this will be a better situation for them because he can get this team prepared, and then hopefully they learn their mistake and they just need to have one voice on the sideline on Saturdays. I think that was their biggest hindrance those first 3 weeks is that every every week they hit a different, interim head coach essentially. So really, I'm hoping they learn their lesson from that. I still think Michigan will be fine. They'll still be prepped in the right ways, by the voice of Jim Harbaugh. And then once the game kicks off on Saturday, again, just have one isolated voice kind of being the leader. Obviously, you have your offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and position coaches, but we'll have to see how it shakes out from there and goes forward. But nonetheless, Harbaugh banned from the sideline for 3 games. It'll be very interesting to see what comes of this going forward. In terms of what other information Michigan releases, or maybe even other schools put out, and what comes of the court case with Michigan trying to get the injunction and appeal the sideline ban. But of course, like I said, we will keep you guys updated on all of that. Staying in the Big Ten, one of the topics we were supposed to talk about last week, we have all the Pac-12 schools joining next season. They released who would be playing who a month ago, and then last weekend they came out and they said the exact dates and time, or not times, but exact dates of the games. And so there's a lot of big matchups. We're going to tell you our favorite matchups, or the matchups that we're most excited for in that 2024 season. Um, Especially between the Pac-12 newcomers and the traditional Big Ten powers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through every Pac-12 school joining. I'm going to give you the matchup for them I'm most excited for. Um, for Oregon, there's 3, in my eyes. One is obviously they go to Michigan on November 2nd, and then they have Ohio State coming to Eugene. I think those are gonna be 2 great matchups, but I also wanted to pick a matchup outside of that. Obviously, there's gonna be a ton of excitement and hype behind those matchups. I'm really excited for Maryland at Oregon. 1, I think the uniforms are gonna be immaculate for that matchup, but 2, Maryland is a team that has steadily improved their football program. Obviously, they've hit a huge, almost brick wall ever since that Ohio State game. They've really struggled, but year over year, this team has been improving and looking better and better. And Oregon, with their traditional spread, light up the scoreboard offense, I think this is going to be a very fun game to watch. That'll be on November 9th next year. So an early November game that's going to have a lot of implications behind it for the Big Ten race, possibly even playoffs, so on and so forth. I think that's going to be a huge matchup. I am really excited to see that one. Maryland at Oregon, November 9th. For Washington, same day, I went with Washington at Penn State. I think Penn State has 2 possible whiteout games next year, one of them being Washington, and UCLA is the other one that I think might get thrown into the whiteout mix. But again, Washington has looked very good the past couple years. It'll be interesting to see how they look. Penix is going to be gone next year. Some of those wide receivers will be gone. But at that point, Washington should have their system established. So it'd be really interesting to see, if they can continue this year over year growth and looking better. And then, of course, Penn State is Penn State. Drew Aller is going to be in his second year. I think that's going to be really exciting to see this offense under him in year 2. So I'm excited to see that game. For USC, I went with Nebraska at USC. A traditional 2 blue blood programs are going to play each other. I think this is very exciting. Nebraska going on the road. Obviously, they bring their own style of football. Matt Rule is going to be in his second year. That's usually when we see a big jump with Matt Rule programs. I think he's already way ahead of schedule this year. I understand, obviously, losing last week to Michigan State is very frustrating, but I think Nebraska is ahead of schedule on their rebuild under him. I think they look very good. And obviously, USC is going to be interesting to see. Caleb Williams is going to be gone. There's a lot of talk about Lincoln Riley already, but still, a traditional West Coast offense playing, a blue blood Big Ten offense. It's going to be a ton of fun to see. So that's my most exciting matchup for USC. They also have Penn State coming to town too, but I just put Nebraska above that one. I'm excited to see that one. And for UCLA, I have Minnesota going to UCLA. This is more so for PJ Fleck versus Chip Kelly. I'm excited to see those 2 coaches face off. 2 coaches with a definitive persona behind them, and they bring a lot to the table. I am very excited to see that. And again, this is a very good defense against a pretty good offense. So I'm excited to see how that matchup shakes out. That's going to be on October 12th. The Nebraska USC game is going to be November 16th. So again, late or mid to late November. That game might have a lot of implications behind it for the Big Ten and playoff race. Um, So it's going to be very interesting to see, how these schedules play out next year, especially with the playoff going to 12 teams. It's going to be a lot of fun to see how these matchups can affect the week to week. Um, yeah, I can't form words right now. Um, so far this season, we've had a lot of upsets and a lot of field stormings. Just saw another one last week. Oklahoma State pulls off the big upset over Oklahoma, the last Bedlam game that we'll see for the foreseeable future. And Oklahoma State stormed the field. They tore down the goalpost. They threw it in the river. They took the goalpost through the Wendy's parking lot. Um, all the fun stuff, or the Wendy's drive-through, I should say. So we wanted to go through and pick what we thought our favorite field storming was, or the best field storming was of 2023 so far. Um, for my pick, I went with Duke in Week 1 against Clemson. It's not often you get to see Duke storm the field, first of all, and Duke football is a feel good story as compared to Duke basketball. Duke basketball actually lost last night to Arizona, but, this was really cool. It was also one of the more classy ones. We've seen a lot of field stormings this year, and we get fan videos from it where the fans are running up to the players, kinda taunting them in their face, and well, I get the gist of it. I like a nice, clean, respectable field storming where the kid just rush the field, they mob the coach, mob the players, all that fun stuff. So and again, this was week 1. It was the perfect way to kinda start off the season. We got this huge upset on a Monday night. Duke fans, they stormed the field, and just created an absolute scene there in Durham, North Carolina. So that's what I went with for my favorite field storming, or what I thought was the best field storming of 2023 so far.
Can you
Alright,
hear
Nick
me?
is ready, so we welcome him in. Nick, what is your favorite field storming of 2023 so far?
Are you actually able to hear me?
Yeah.
I don't. I'm not. Okay. All right. Bet. So that was a headache. Anyway, I'm not 100% sure which one you were just talking about. Although I did hear something that thinks we might have chosen the same one. But I picked Duke week 1 after
Yeah.
upsetting Clemson. I thought that was the one that you just picked. But really, for a lot of different reasons. One, going into the season, nobody really expected it. Everybody thought Clemson was going to be better and Duke was going to be worse than what they are. But mainly because it kind of introduced Duke football to the season that they were about to have. Some things have happened the last couple weeks that have kind of derailed, I think, what could have been a great season. I mean, it's still going to be a great season for Duke football. Um, but just that week kind of put them on the map for this season and put a lot of people on notice that had them on their schedule. And the fact that it happened week 1 was really like it makes a lot of difference. I think that added a lot of momentum and kind of bolstered them to the team that they were up until Riley's injury. So that was definitely my favorite so far this year.
Yeah. A great story to start the season. Speaking of playing at home and field stormings, I wanted to get your opinion, on what you thought was, or who has the best home field advantage in college football? And what do
Yes.
you think
So
makes it the best?
right. So um, as a Penn State fan, every other Penn State fan would say, "Oh, Happy Valley," but we've talked multiple times on this podcast about their record during just the whiteout game, let alone home games against bigger opponents. Anyway, so I ended up giving this one to Alabama, and the reason I did that was strictly for the fact that going into this season, their last home loss against ranked, unranked, any opponent was 2019, and that was the Joe Burrow and the Tigers. There wasn't a whole lot of teams in college football history that I think could have beat them. Um, and I think that this year's game against Texas at home early in the season, I think if that was played later in the season, like right now, I think that's a little closer game. I mean, it was only at 10 points, I believe. But I think it's at least a closer game. And I think Alabama has a chance to win if it's played at this point in the season. Alabama's kind of found another gear. Texas has stumbled a little bit. So I think that I got to give it to Alabama strictly off of when you think of home field advantage, sort of like I just mentioned, Penn State, Happy Valley. You can have a great crowd, but if you're not getting wins out of it, it's not really a home field advantage. It's just a good home field atmosphere. So I had to go with the Alabama win streak at home.
Yeah. I picked 2. These are 2 I've seen in person, but I went 1 group of 5, 1 power 5. The group of 5 is actually where I was at last week, App State. Um, and it's not a super loud environment. It's not a super big stadium, but they do enough to affect the game. There was also said they have one of the best winning percentages at home in all of college football, including the Power Five schools. They're right up there with the Georgia, Alabama, Utah's, all those schools. Um, it's difficult to go up there and play in the mountains, play in the boonies, and deal with that existential environment, and then deal with the crowd environment as well. That was a very fun game to be at last week. But it's difficult to go into App State and win. And I think not only the crowd, but I think there's a lot of other factors behind it that make it so difficult. So I went with App State for the group of five. For Power Five, again, another one I've seen in person, I went with Virginia Tech. And the reason I went with Virginia Tech is because I went there when they were not so great, and the stadium still sold out. So this is a fan base who, whether the team is good or bad, they're going to show up and support their team. I feel like if next year Alabama goes 2-7 for some reason, the stands would be completely empty by the end of the season. They might pack out for the Iron Bowl just because it's a rivalry game, but I really feel like you would see I shouldn't say empty, but you'd see an attendance drop. Whereas again, Virginia Tech, doesn't matter how good or bad they are, their fans show up, they make that stadium loud. I think it's one of the best environments in all of college football. Obviously one of the best entrances, but I really like how Virginia Tech just supports their team no matter how good or bad they are. I understand, it's probably not the best home field advantage in terms of statistics and home winning percentage, all this other stuff. But being there in person and again, just seeing how much support that team has, that's why I'm going to go with Virginia Tech for best home field advantage in college football. Um, so moving on, one thing that's causing a lot of debate is the college football playoff rankings. They came out again this week, and we have the updated one for you here. Ohio State's still number one. Um, but I wanted to get your opinion, and I've made my thoughts clear on this on TikTok, and I'll talk about it after. I'll let you go first. But do you really feel like the weekly, now obviously at the end of the day, the overall rankings matter because that tells us who gets into the playoffs at the end of the season. But do you feel like the week to week rankings really matter in the long run?
In a short answer, no. To give a little context, really, it's just giving the fans something to watch, something to keep track of, something to debate week in and week out. The only one that matters is that final one that tells us who's in and who's out. We can sit here and say, oh, well, this team's ranked this and this team's ranked this. Like for example, Michigan today, they have a big matchup. A lot of people, Michigan's the favorite. A lot of people think Michigan's going to win, but at the end of the day, if they lost, Penn State's sitting at number 10. If Michigan loses, unless it's a very close loss, they lose it on a last second field goal or something, they might only drop a couple spots. Um, but that could shake up everything, and Michigan could be a team that isn't in the conversation by the end of the year. So we can sit here and we can look at these week in and week out all we want. Fans can hype it up, fans can say this, that, and the other, but at the end of the day, that final one's the one that matters. And there's a lot of big games that happen in these last couple weeks that could completely shake it up. So yeah, while it's fun to sit there and look at them and debate and say, "Oh yeah, my team's currently sitting in the playoffs," um, it doesn't matter at all.
Yeah. The one point I saw somebody else making, it was CF Budge, and I really like his content. But he came out and he said, "Why don't we just do this like a selection Sunday? Like just do it like the NCAA bracket." And I think that'd be perfect, especially for next year when we're expanding to the 12-team playoff. Um, just run with the AP poll for the regular season. Obviously, we have our issues with it, but it's fine. And then once we get past conference championship weekend, okay, here's your top 12 teams. This is who's going to be in the playoff. Obviously, we know next year if you win the top five highest ranked conferences, our conference champions will automatically get in. Um, and what that's the proposal right now. It still needs to get passed. But at the end of the day, like you said, I really feel like the week to week in the long run doesn't matter. The big debate this week was Oregon, Texas, and Alabama, 6, 7, 8 in their rankings and how they should all be positioned. And I brought it up on our TikTok, and a lot of Alabama fans were upset with me. Um, but saying, "Well, we've beat ranked teams. Oregon's only beaten one," and I'm like, "That's fair." But by the end of the season, that can change, and all of a sudden, that argument from your resume is gone. The two first of all, Tennessee being at 13, that's just ridiculous in my eyes. But there's a very real possibility they could lose 2 of their next 3 games, and I don't think if they lose 4 games at that point, they should be ranked. LSU again, not the easiest schedule lying ahead for them, and they're sitting at 19. So all of a sudden, if those 2 teams, stumble towards the end of the season, they follow the rankings, then Alabama is screwed. Oregon has a grueling schedule upcoming. They have Oregon State. They still have to play Arizona State and USC. Again, who knows where? I don't think Arizona State's going to get ranked with 2 wins right now, but um, it week to week, again, I just really feel like the grand scheme of the playoff rankings don't matter. Like you said, it's something for us to discuss and look at, but there's so many scenarios ahead of us that need to happen, for teams to move up or teams to fall back. The week to week rankings almost feel like, well, if the season ended today, this is what would happen. And we're sitting here debating, if Alabama should be ahead of Oregon. Well, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because Oregon wouldn't go to the playoffs, neither would Alabama if the season ended today. Oregon and Washington need to win out and win the Pac-12 championship for any chance to get into the playoff. Alabama needs to win out, needs to beat Georgia for any hope to get into the playoffs. And same with a lot of these other schools. So that's why I feel like, again, it's fun for us to talk about and look at. But going forward, I'm going to try to not let it affect me as much because, again, I just feel like it doesn't matter that much.
Right.
Um, but
To be fair,
time.
there's
Okay,
been
go ahead.
conversation about this selection committee and their consistency or lack thereof. I would like to be a fly on the wall when they get together here and they decide who's where. Because in my opinion, and again, I'm somebody that doesn't really matter. But I think that Washington right now is one of the 4 best teams in college football. I think they have the resume to back it up. Now, all those teams sitting within that top 5, haven't lost. But I think that on paper, on resume, I think that Washington has proven that, again, like you said, if the season ended today, that Washington should be a playoff team. Now, again, things can happen. Things can happen with anybody, anywhere on this list.
Mhm.
But just while we were talking about it, and consistency. I forget how you worded it. Their only consistency is being inconsistent, or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, Figured I'd give Washington a little shout out. They've been a great football team so far this year.
Yeah, they have, and my when I was making all those videos this week on TikTok, the point I was trying to stress more than anything, and was at the beginning of the season, everybody pretty much unanimously was in agreement that Pac-12 was one of the best conferences across the board. They played really well out of conference and all this other stuff. But now that conference play has started and a lot of these teams have started losing, and obviously they're not going to be ranked anymore. They're not looking as good. At one point, there was 7 Pac-12 schools ranked, and now obviously we're down to 3 or 4. Excuse me, I forgot Arizona jumped up into the rankings. But still, it went from 7 to 4, and now everybody's acting like the Pac-12 is horrible again and not very good because obviously we have teams like Stanford. Cal hasn't looked very good. Washington State has fallen off the face of the earth since they started off 4-0. They were ranked. They beat Wisconsin, who is another highly talked about Big Ten school. Um, so that's what was frustrating to me is how quickly that narrative is flipped, simply because they've entered conference play. And again, the same thing we see every year is Pac-12 schools start beating up on each other, and that was just the most frustrating part is everybody's acting like, "Well, Oregon hasn't beaten anybody." I'm not trying to argue that point. I'm trying to argue how have we gone from, "Oh, the Pac-12 is so great," to, "Wow, the Pac-12 is terrible." And again, to your point, Washington has looked very good. Obviously, they stumbled 2 weeks. They still found ways to win, but they're undefeated. They beat a very good team at home. How are they not considered to be in the top 4? How are they sitting on the outside looking in? When again at the beginning of the season, wow, the Pac-12 is so great. They're playing really good football out west. What a high note for the Pac-12 to go out on. And now all of a sudden, 5 weeks later, we're sitting here going, wow, the Pac-12 sucks, and this is a horrible conference, and we don't want any of their teams into the playoff.
And I
That
think
was
that's
what was.
why Washington's still sitting on the outside of the top 4. Um, but at the end of the day, like, this is why, again, I'd love to be a fly on the wall in these committee meetings because I understand if you're talking about eye test, then I can understand why you might have Michigan in the top 4. Um, they were a great team last year. They look like they're a great team this year. Today's going to be their biggest test of the season. Washington has had those tests, and like you said, yeah, they stumbled a little bit, but they've come out on top. So I think that you got to choose one way or the other. You're either going to go off of eye test, or you're going to go off a resume. It realistically, you should be using both, but it seems like the committee looks at Ohio State and says, okay, they have a better resume. They have a better
Mhm.
win than Georgia has. And then they look at Michigan and they're like, well, Michigan doesn't have the resume, but they look good with the eye test. Let's keep them up there. I think that there needs to be a balance of both within there. You can't just pick and choose which teams you're using eye test and resume for, and it seems like that's what the committee's doing. Which obviously something's got to change there. I don't necessarily disagree with the top 5 teams here. I think their rankings could be swapped around a little bit, um, but the fans want great college football, and at the end of the day, I don't want something like some sort of bias, not necessarily a team bias, but well, this team we should look at their resume instead of the eye test, and this team we should look at the eye test instead of the resume to keep us from what could potentially be great college football playoff matchups. So I feel like something's got to change there, but I know we've talked about that before, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to this week's game of the week. We had to use a wheel again this week, and we ended up getting Ole Miss at Georgia. This is going to be a very exciting matchup today. So we have a lot to talk about. We're going to get into their history, the keys of the game, and all that. These SEC schools, Georgia leads 32-12 with one tie in there. The last time Ole Miss won was actually the last time they played in 2016. This was a vacated win, but Ole Miss won 45-14 in Oxford, Mississippi. Before that, the last time they won was 1996 in Athens, Georgia, 31-27. So, Nick, give me your keys to the game. What are the most important facets for either Ole Miss to walk out with the upset or Georgia to clinch the SEC East?
Yeah. So before I get into this, I just want to say the person that does our video editing is fantastic. But anyway, so I think I think this game has the potential to be a lot more competitive than what maybe we thought going into the season. We've seen Ole Miss play at a very high caliber in multiple games this season. But we've also seen them, kind of play down to some opponents or not quite live up and play up to what their potential is. So on the Ole Miss side, if you're looking to come away with an upset, you got to be efficient on offense. Can't turn the ball over. You got to be able to move the ball down the field. You're not going to score every possession. You're facing one of the best defenses in the country. But you just got to keep that in mind, and you got to remember, hey, this drive might not have worked out. Go out, start fresh the next drive. And I think on the Ole Miss side, their defense is going to come down to scheme. I don't think Ole Miss's defense, even though Georgia's missing Bowers, I think that Ole Miss's defense is slightly overmatched by Georgia's offense. Now Bowers being out, that helps them a lot, but there's still a lot of talent. And I think I want to say it was you maybe that made a TikTok talking about how Bowers' absence has kind of opened up Georgia's offense. And I don't know if there was too many people that actually expected that because when Bowers is on the field, a lot of the offense runs through him. He's a great player, as it should. Um, but it's really opened up, and that's going to and on the Georgia side, that's going to be a key. You don't have Bowers. You're going to have to spread the ball around, make Ole Miss make plays. Don't be predictable. Like I said, spread the ball around. Make sure that they can't signal onto one guy and stop your offense. Because when you have Bowers on the field, they know you're going to go to him, and they still can't stop him.
Mhm.
So now you don't have a player on the field that high caliber. You're going to have to spread it around so that they can't key on one guy. And as far as on the Georgia side of the ball, Georgia's defense, opposite of what I said, Ole Miss, you got to create those turnovers because Ole Miss, when they're playing well, especially when their offense is playing well, they have that ability to make splash plays and to drive down the field. So you got to be efficient on defense. Get them in situations that you like to be in as a defense. Get them in those third and longs where your big boys up front can make plays. Really, I think that. Well, I'm not going to get too deep into that. We're going to make the picks later. Um, but yeah, really, I think the key matchup here is going to be Georgia's defense versus Ole Miss's offense. Ole Miss is going to have to move the ball because if you're not moving the ball and you're just punting, Georgia might not have the best offense in the country, but they have a good enough offense. They're going to score points against you. You got to be able to score points against them.
Yeah. For my keys for Ole Miss, one, you need to find a way to play defense. They have not played very good defense all season. One of the worst in the FBS in terms of yards allowed, points allowed, all that fun stuff. So you need to find a way to bring your A game on defense and at least try and slow this Georgia offense down, like you just mentioned. The second thing for Ole Miss is you need to show up for the game. When they went into Alabama, Bryant Denny Stadium, it felt like maybe the moment was just too big for them. There was a lot of hype behind this Ole Miss team, and Alabama was really struggling at the time, and everybody looked at this Ole Miss team as the favorites to win the SEC West all of a sudden, and they just kind of fell on their face. The offense looked horrible. Defense did not play their best game, and so they need to find a way to show up for this moment. This is a huge matchup. Again, you're going to be on the national stage. You need to not only just bring your A game, but again, just show up, be there, and be ready to play, be ready to take it to Georgia. For Georgia, just play your game. You were the back-to-back defending national champions for a reason. And they've finally found their footing. It seems like on both sides of the ball, their defense has really exploded the last couple of weeks and played that Georgia style defense that we've been used to seeing for how many years now. And they've been shutting down some pretty good offenses the past couple of weeks. Again, on the offensive side of the ball, like you just mentioned, and obviously you never want to see a player get hurt. But I feel like a load was taken off of Carson Beck where he and this is what I said earlier this week, when you remove your safety blanket, you're forced to look for other outlets. And he's been doing a much better job of spreading the ball around. His numbers are down a hair, but I feel like that's because he feels comfortable to take more risk. He's not getting in the panic mode and going, okay, where's Bowers? I can just get him the ball. If he starts feeling pressure, all right, go through my reads. Okay, just take a shot on this guy or tuck it and run. He's found a way to use his legs the past couple weeks as well. And so I really like how Georgia's offense is playing. So just play your game. Just continue to play. Don't go out there and try and get flashy and run up the score or anything like that. Just play your game, and that's gonna put you. That's gonna clinch the SEC East for you, and again put you in the driver's seat of your own destiny to go out there and try and win a third straight national title. So just play your own game, and I think Georgia's going to be more than fine. Um, so we'll come back. We'll make our picks for this game later. It is time now to give you our weekly cash out picks, give you our updated standings. Um, Last week I got my first push, so I joined Slade in the triple digit um, uh, record so far. Nick, you had a pretty good week going 2-1. You're back above 500. So I am looking to get at least I just give me two 500 this week and I'll be happy. So first up, we're going to go over Slade's picks since he's not here. He's taking Georgia Tech plus 14.5 on the road at Clemson. Obviously, Clemson coming off that huge victory last week over Notre Dame. And Dabo's back to his corny ways. You got to love it. Georgia Tech has been one of the weirdest college football teams to watch this entire season. They'll beat really good teams, and then they'll lose to teams like Bowling Green, and you have no idea what's going on down there. But they're still in contention to make a bowl game. This is going to be a huge step to get that. Slade at least likes them to cover. And speaking of covering, he likes Utah on the road plus 8.5. They got their butts whooped by Oregon, and then they go on the road at Arizona State, and they put up the most points they've scored all season. Biggest margin of victory all season. Arizona State's worst margin of defeat before last week. It was 29 points, and now it's sitting at 52. So Utah with a huge bounce back, but now they have to go on the road to Washington at Seattle. Obviously, a very raucous environment. Speaking of home field advantages, so it's going to be tough for Utah, but Slade likes them to at least cover on the road plus 8.5. Nick, go ahead and give us your picks for this week.
Yeah. So up first, I got Oklahoma State minus 2.5. I don't want to get into this too deep because I'm like borderline could go in a rant here. I don't quite understand the spread. It seems that this was my looking through all the spreads. This was my disrespectful spread of the week. Um, almost ran it there. Almost ran it there. I'm just gonna move on. Oklahoma State minus 2.5. And then up next, all reliable. I got the Iowa under 28.5. I think it was 29.5 last week. Might have been 28.5. Um, but just looking through their games, I mean, they've been just about under this number in most games. Um, I think there was only two or three that haven't been under this number so far this season when I was playing. Uh, it's comical at this point. Like I've started seeing a lot of memes flying around about like teams are four in some ridiculous number when only getting this many yards, and Iowa has all four of those wins, and it's very comical at this point. But I definitely think the under 28.5 is very reasonable here, unless Iowa's defense happens to put up two touchdowns. Then it's going to get close real quick. But I really like the Iowa under in this.
Yeah, I mean, if they keep hitting the under, might as well keep going for it. For my picks, I'm right with you on the Oklahoma State. I didn't put this as my most disrespectful spread this week because at least I somewhat understand it. UCF obviously played Oklahoma very close a couple weeks ago. Oklahoma State's coming off that huge upset, and it's very common to see a letdown from that to the next week. So at least they're favored. And now, if they would have flipped and made UCF favored,
Right.
yeah, I would have had a bigger issue. But I can at least see somewhat of the thought train behind it. But yeah, I'm gonna join you. I'm gonna take
Yeah,
Oklahoma
and no
State here. I think
disrespect to UCF, by the way, they've been playing some
yes.
good football this year.
Yeah, I think Oklahoma State just has way too much momentum right now. They need to still go out there and take what's theirs. They need to capitalize and get themselves into um, the Big 12 championship game. Most
I
likely
also
against
think that this is the
Texas.
first time in the podcast that two people have chose the same cash out pick, and I seen it. I debated not choosing it because you chose it, but I was like, I like this number so much.
Yeah,
So congrats to UCF for covering.
yeah, exactly. But my most disrespectful spread of the week is actually my other pick, and it's West Virginia plus 12.5 at Oklahoma. I understand Oklahoma is still a liked team by a lot of the sports books and a lot of Big 12 fans, but I don't understand how you can go on the 2-game losing streak, lose to the two teams they have, and then see West Virginia get on a little bit of a hot streak off of that Oklahoma State loss, look better and better week over week, and think this is going to be over a 2 possession game or over at least over 10.5. I see this being a touchdown game, if that. I really like West Virginia. I like how they're playing. I think Oklahoma has lost a lot of the air out of their bubble. I don't think they're going to be able to get as excited for this game. I don't think the crowd's going to be as into it. So I really like West Virginia to go on the road and at least cover the spread here. So I'm going to take West Virginia plus 12.5 on the road at Oklahoma. Now for our upset alert picks, I'll give you our updated standings here. You and I are tied 7 points apiece. Slade's still trailing behind at 2 points. So he's looking for a huge bounce back this week. He is going to start with, let it load here. There we go. He's going to take Georgia minus 11 at home versus Ole Miss. I don't hate this pick. I feel like this is pretty good. This has the potential of being either a close game or it's going to be a blowout. So I like Slade rolling with the Georgia 11-point favorite. So he likes Ole Miss. So at least cover that, and he gets 2 points if Ole Miss wins. Go ahead and give us your pick, Nick.
Yeah, so I'm taking Illinois minus 6.5 versus Indiana. I stared at these games or this game in particular for probably a good 10 minutes. Looked at how both seasons have went. Um, I think really this game could be a coin flip game. We've seen both of these teams play very good football, and we've seen both of these teams play very bad football this year. Um, it's really going to depend on which team shows up for both sides. But I like Indiana's chances to cover this. I like Indiana's chances to possibly win this. So this is what I ended up going with this week.
I mean, the past couple weeks, I've gained a bunch of points on you in these standings because I went away from just looking at the ranked matchups, and that got me some points looking elsewhere. And now you guys have caught on; you're looking elsewhere too. So we'll have to see how this shakes out.
It's
For both
hard
of us.
because like I don't want to choose something that's less than 5 points.
Right?
Because I feel like that's kind of low hanging fruit. But then when you start getting like the over 10, it's less likely to hit. So like I like trying to find a good range of like 7 to 10 max.
Yeah. Um, for my upset alert, I'm going with Liberty. Speaking of not ranked teams, they're home against Old Dominion. Old Dominion plays every single opponent they played close. They almost upset Wake Forest at home. They played James Madison very close a few weeks ago. I like Old Dominion to at least cover the spread. I think 13 points is a little outrageous. I understand Liberty's a pretty good team, but Conference USA isn't the best, depth of field, depth of opponents. So I like Old Dominion to go on the road, play their style of football, and at least keep this game close. Give me the 1 point for the cover. And hey, if they pull off the upset, I'll absolutely take the 2 points. Time now for our picks of the week. We have 11 games to look at, updated standings after last night. Slade pulls away by another game. He's up 104 to 101, and then I'm another game back of you. So it's getting close to the end of the season. So I need to start making my move here. I closed the gap, but now I'm starting to fall back. So we need to get something figured out. First game up we're going to have is number 3 Michigan at number 10 Penn State. This will be the big noon game today on Fox. Nick, who do you got?
Yeah, so you and I, we like to pick our teams. We don't care if we genuinely think they can win or not. So I'm going with Penn State. With that being said, I do think they can win. I almost chose this as my upset alert, but the last time I did that didn't work out. So I decided to stay away from that. Just pick them. But I think that I don't think it's far fetched to think that Penn State can win this game. It's really going to depend on if you would ask me 2 weeks ago watching that Ohio State game, 3 weeks ago, yeah, 3 weeks ago watching that Ohio State game, the way the offense looked, I wouldn't have I wouldn't have said that we had a chance to win this game. But then again, Michigan hasn't played a great team yet, um, so it's really hard to tell what we have going into this matchup. Um, but with that being said, Ohio State, Penn State. I'm going to get crucified for that. Penn State, since Drew Aller threw that his first collegiate career interception 2 weeks ago, um, it looks like it's loosened him up. He's not afraid to air the ball out now, and we seen that last week. There was and I feel like this is every year. There was some hype around Maryland and oh, their offense is so good and yada yada yada. And every time they say that before the Penn State game, Penn State blows them out. Shout out to the 49-0 victory the other year when at Maryland when students left class early to tailgate for the game and all that. Um, so if you're a Maryland fan, when it comes to playing Penn State, I don't care how good your offense looks. Don't hype it up too much. But with that being said, Penn State still got one of the best defenses in the country. I think the scoring in this is going to be similar to the way the Ohio State Penn State game was. Um, it's going to be a very fun matchup to watch, and I just hope that we end up pulling it off. Because what a time to beat Michigan when they're dealing with all this stuff with Harbaugh. And with
Uh,
that being said, I don't think Harbaugh not being here makes a difference. Got to coach all week. I don't even know. Like, I feel like there's an update coming out every hour of something that
yeah.
changes. So who knows? Maybe he does end up on the sideline. I don't know. But either way, I don't think that makes a difference. I'm just saying timing. It would be fun to just add insult to injury.
And by the way, quick update. The Iowa Rutgers over under just dropped to 27.5. It is now the lowest over under in it was already the lowest over under in history, but now it's even farther. And Iowa has some of the lowest, let's see, one, two, three, five of the six lowest ever over unders all belong to Iowa. Um, Slate is going to go with Michigan on the road. And you know what? I am too. And just thinking more and more about this game, I think at the end of the day, obviously both teams have really good defenses, but I think it's going to come down to the offense. I think Michigan has a better offense with Blake Corum and JJ McCarthy has been playing really well this season. And then a stat I didn't know was real came out the other day. Penn State ranks lower than Iowa in yards per completion in all of college football. So
I see
that's
that.
not
I've seen
that
that.
is not a stat you want on your side heading into this game. And at the end of the day, I really feel like, and I know we keep harping on this, but you keep making this game the big noon game is going to keep affecting the outcome. If it was a whiteout, I think I'd give a slight edge to Penn State. But this game being played at noon, I'm going to give it to Michigan on the road. I also think this is going to be a pissed off group of players. They're going to come ready to play. When Michigan and JJ McCarthy are at their cringiest, I can't wait to see what T-shirts they wear getting off the bus. Can't wait to see what tribute they give to Jim Harbaugh. Before the first play, like they did in Week 1.
Yeah,
But
like the
when they're
man
at their
died.
cringiest, they're at their best somehow. So I like Michigan to go on the road and take care of business against Penn State today. This is going to be an exciting one. Kicking off at noon on the ACC network, we have Virginia Tech at Boston College. Huge matchup. Boston College made a bowl. They are locked into bowl season. Who would have thought that starting the season? Virginia Tech still fighting to get there. They need to win 2 out of their last 3 to do it. Nick, who do you got in this one?
Yeah, I got Boston College. I think this is going to be a great competitive game. But I think that Boston College has played really well this season. Normally, Boston College, you know, you might count them in for 2, 3 wins in a season. But this doesn't look like a 2, 3 win team. Virginia Tech struggled early on. They've gathered some momentum here. This is going to be very competitive in my eyes. But I got to give the edge to Boston College.
Uh, Slade is going to go with the Hokies on the road. This was a very difficult game for me to pick. Obviously, I think very highly of Virginia Tech. I loved, and I just talked about this earlier. I love that environment. If I wasn't a Duck fan, I'd probably be a Hokie fan at this point. But um, I just had to go with Boston College. I think they have the hot hand. They found ways to win these games the past couple of weeks. I really like how they're playing right now, and it's hard for me to pick against a team that has played so well and found ways to win. Virginia Tech is coming off an ugly loss on the road at Louisville. A lot of hype was behind them. Hey, maybe they can make this game close, get some momentum. Maybe they even pull off the upset, and they lose 34-3. Um, so I'm not writing off Virginia Tech for making a bowl game. They have NC State coming to town next week. Brennan Armstrong is going to be the starting quarterback. So NC State might not win another game the rest of the year. And then they have to play their rival Virginia in that final game of the season. But just again, just with the way they're playing, they have the hot hand. I have to go with that. So I'm going to go with the Eagles at home today. Staying in the ACC and the noon slate, we have Georgia Tech at Clemson on ABC. Obviously, Georgia Tech, huge win last week. Clemson, huge win last week. Georgia Tech is still trying to make a bowl game, as is Clemson. And if they win today, they will punch that ticket. Nick, who do you got in this matchup?
Excuse me. I got to go with Clemson. Um, I think that the game, I believe it was Slade that had this game in his cash out picks. I agree with
Yeah.
Slade. I think that this game could be closer than what the spread suggests. This is a Clemson team that nobody really expected to see this year. There's a lot of people that had them in a possible college football playoff conversation, they haven't lived up to that. Like you said, they're still fighting for a bowl spot. But I think they get that today.
Slade is going to go with Clemson as well. And I am too. Again, I think Georgia Tech can cover. We're talking about teams coming off, coming down a little bit after a huge win. I think that's Clemson. Georgia Tech is also, like I said, one of the weirdest teams in college football. They can upset good teams and they can lose to really bad teams. But I really like Clemson to kind of hone in the second half and finish out this game strong and put away Georgia Tech. But I do agree with Slade. I think Georgia Tech can cover. So go ahead and make sure you put your bets on Clemson to cover this game. But our first sweep of the day, next game we have up is Miami at Florida State. Big time rivalry game. Take you back to the 90s, early 2000s when I felt like this game meant a lot more. But nonetheless, this has huge implications. Miami, rough stretch ever since they lost that Georgia Tech game. They have punched a ticket to a bowl season, but they have a losing record ever since that Georgia Tech game. They just lost in ugly fashion to NC State last week, only scored 6 points. Florida State in contention to make the playoffs, obviously trying to finish out the season strong, get themselves to the ACC championship, most likely play Louisville. But still a lot of questions around both of these teams. 3:30 on ABC. Nick, who do you got?
Yeah, I like Florida State in this. And the fact that it's a rivalry, in-state rivalry game. Being at home for Florida State really helps. I don't think Miami is on the level of Florida State, but we know how these rivalry games can go, especially in-state rivals. Um, and these are the kind of games that Florida State hasn't necessarily thrived in this year. I think Miami has a good chance to make this competitive. And if I've said it once, I've said it 100 times. You let a team hang around that's not supposed to be hanging around, bad things happen. But I think that Florida State ends up pulling this one out. And who knows? Maybe they finally put everything together and play like a college football playoff hopeful team.
Yeah. Slade is going Florida State, and I'm going to pile on too. I'm going with the Knowles on the road, or excuse me, at home. I don't think this is going to be close. The sports book have it at about 15-point spread right now. I think it might be worse than that. Miami looks ugly. And I understand it's a rivalry game. Obviously, that adds a factor, and it might be close. But I think going on the road to a very hostile environment, I think Florida State is going to put the game on Jordan Travis's back, and he's going to show why he should still be in the Heisman conversation. His name's been kind of forgotten about the last couple of weeks. And I think if any week is a good week to have his Heisman moment, I think it's going to be this one. You have your rival coming to town. Again, questions are starting to pop up about, is Florida State really passing the eye test? They didn't look amazing against Pitt last week, and that kind of fueled the fire. I still think Florida State is one of the best teams in the country, and I think they're going to remind everybody of that this weekend. So I like Florida State to win at home. Staying in the 3:30 slot, we have a huge Pac-12 matchup. Utah trying to salvage any hope they have of making the Pac-12 title game on the road at Washington, who's trying to keep their playoff hopes alive and keep their momentum going to try and break into that top four. A win over a top 20 team will be a huge notch in the belt for them. This will be 3:30 on Fox. Nick, who do you got?
Yeah, I got Washington. I said it earlier. I think they're a top four team in the country. And there might be some ties in that. I think we're going to figure out a lot of things today, but I think Washington's just too good. Their defense is enough to hold Utah's offense. I know Utah's offense looked good last weekend, but I think that Washington defense is up there as a college football playoff worthy defense. And I think that they show that they're at home. That always helps. And Utah's defense, I know Utah's defense is good, but this Washington offense can be very scary. You give them an inch, they take a mile, and I think that they walk out of their home stadium feeling good about where they sit.
Yeah. Slade's going to go with the Utes on the road, and I'm going to go with the Huskies at home. They have two very big matchups the next 2 weeks with Utah and then Oregon State, and then they finish the season with the Apple Cup. Obviously, we talked about Washington State struggles, but after the Oregon game, I can't, in good conscience, trust this Utah offense to look that good again against a pretty good Washington defense. And again, with this game being in Seattle, I think that adds another element on top of everything. This has the Utah is that team. They're either going to play you really close and sneak out a win, or they're just going to lose by a couple scores, as we saw 2 weeks ago. But I really like Washington to hold on and get the win at home today. So give me the Huskies. Flipping over to the SEC, we have Tennessee at Missouri. Tennessee is favored in this game. They are one position higher in the rankings at 13. This will be 3:30 on CBS. Nick, who do you got?
Yeah, sitting here, I didn't realize who we all picked until just now when I looked here.
Way to
But
spoil
I
it for
got
everybody.
Yeah, sorry, but it's got me a little nervous. That's why I mentioned it. But I gotta go with Missouri. Um, I think that Missouri, I think on paper, Tennessee is the better team. Obviously, Missouri's been playing. They both have been playing some good football. But I think that Missouri has all the momentum right now. I think that I mean, if you're talking about a team that nobody thought would be where they are at this point in the season, Missouri's got to be up there. Um, just playing absolutely great football. This is a team that was competing for bowl eligibility a lot of the seasons that I can remember, and here they are, ranked 14 right now. And in my opinion, I think they're going to be ranked higher by the end of the season. Depending on how things go exactly, but great football team. I think the home field advantage is going to be huge here, and I think that's the difference.
Slate is going with the Tigers, and I am as well. And it came down to a couple factors. One, I think Missouri's a better team on paper when you look at it. But I also think Missouri remembers what happened last year. Tennessee's trying to fight to stay in the playoff conversation after the loss to Georgia, and they ran up the score on Missouri. They kept their starters in, they just kept scoring and made Missouri look really ugly on the road at Neyland Stadium. I think Missouri remembers that. They remember how good they are this season. And also, if you look at Tennessee's schedule, they have Georgia coming to town next week. I think they get caught looking ahead at that game. I think Missouri comes out, plays really well. I expect them to pick up a huge win today at home. I like the Tigers. Moving to the Big Ten and the game we were just talking about a little bit ago with the lowest over under in the history of college football to this point. We have Rutgers at number 22, Iowa. Why the committee decided to rank Iowa again, I will never know. But this will be 3:30 on the Big Ten Network. Nick, who do you got?
Yeah, I'm taking Iowa in this. I as much as I don't enjoy putting a pick on Iowa, and a team that can't score points on offense, their defense is good enough to hold Rutgers. Rutgers offense is not great, and Rutgers defense is just bad enough to let Iowa, move the ball, control the clock. And we've seen it time and time again this year. That's how Iowa wins games. It ain't pretty. Their offensive coordinator is hot dog water, but they're winning games. They're sitting at 7-2 right now, and I think they win another one today.
Slade is going to go with Rutgers. And you know what? Give me the Scarlet Knights on the road. Back to the Iowa offense. If you continue to play close games like this, and we saw this in the Minnesota game, if you fail to put away teams when you are playing like the better team, just because your offense is so atrocious to watch, but if you continue to put yourself in these close situations, it's going to continue to bite you sooner or later. I think this is another one possession game, but I think without the ability to pull away and put Rutgers away. I think Rutgers' offense is better than we give them credit for. Ohio State obviously is one of the best defenses in the country, and Rutgers was still able to move the ball for decent portions of the game. I think maybe that gives Rutgers a little bit of confidence heading in here. So I like the Scarlet Knights on the road to pull off the upset and get a win over a ranked team. So give me Rutgers. Next game we have the night slate starting now. West Virginia at Oklahoma. This will be 7 p.m. on Fox. Nick, who do you got?
Yeah, I'm taking Oklahoma in this. No discredit to West Virginia having a great season. I think West Virginia has a chance at winning this game. This isn't a very confident Oklahoma pick for me. This game has a lot of question marks, and we got to wait till 7 p.m. for those to get answered. But I like Oklahoma's chances. I the way I see it, I think Oklahoma, they kind of have a storyline that their seasons have gone for the most part the past couple years. Let's have a really good team, have a lot of hype at the beginning of the year, start out the schedule great, drop 1 to 2 bad losses throughout the season, and then turn around and finish strong and make people think, oh man, what could have been if they didn't lose those games. So that's kind of where we sit now. We're at that, they've hit that down and we're about to go back up again. So give me Oklahoma.
Slade is going to take Oklahoma as well, and you know what? I just can't, in good faith, pick the Sooners right now. I don't think they're playing good enough football for me to pick them. And like you said, they do have that roller coaster season, but I think we're not off the downslope yet. And if they don't get off to a fast start, and kind of pull away from West Virginia and the Mountaineers stay in this game, they can absolutely end up flipping it at the end. West Virginia has a pretty underrated defense as well. Oklahoma's defense is still not that great. So I like the Mountaineers to score a lot of points, keep this game close, and I think they pull off a surprise at the end of the game. Uh, Going over to the ACC, we had the battle for the victory bell between Duke and UNC. UNC back into the rankings at number 24. This will be 8 o'clock on the ACC network. Nick, who do you got?
Yeah, I'm taking UNC in this. And speaking of not the most confident picks, I'm not a big fan of the matchup in this. I think Duke's defense, Duke as a whole last week, I don't think played up to their potential. Um, but I think that this is kind of the games that UNC football likes to drop. I think that they should win this game. But again, Duke's defense is still very good. Not their offense hasn't looked as good as we've seen them earlier in the season. But really, this came down. This ended up being my coin flip game of the week. I flipped the coin and it said Duke, and I said there's no way I could say that on my podcast when it's UNC versus Duke, so I had to go with UNC.
Slade is going to go with Duke. And even with Riley Leonard out, I don't know. I just don't trust UNC right now. They haven't looked very good on either side of the ball. They dropped those two ugly games to Virginia and then Georgia Tech. This is a very hot and cold team. They have everything in front of them, and it was hard for me to go against UNC, especially with them being at home. But this UNC defense gives me a lot of question marks. They haven't looked very good all season. They've had games where they played well, and then they'll turn around and then they'll look ugly. Again, this is the game I'm probably the most unsure about this week. But you know what? I went with Duke on the road. I think a lot of people are doubting them. The backup quarterback's going to be in. So you know what? Give me Duke on the road. Why not? Going out to the late game in the Pac-12. Um, Shout out to all the Oregon fans that complained about all the 11 a.m. kickoffs for them. And now here they are, and they got to stay up extra. Well, they don't have to stay up extra late, but now I have to stay up extra late.
Right. This is
Um,
like dinner time for them.
yeah, this is 7:30 kickoff for them. It's 10:30
Right.
kickoff for us. But this will be the late game on Fox. Nick, who do you got?
Yeah, I got to go with Oregon. I think 3 weeks ago this game would have looked a lot closer, but USC is not looking great. For the sake of Caleb Williams, I hope he has a good game every week. The past 2 weeks, his draft stock is has been plummeting, looking like my bank account out here. But I think that even before this bad stretch of games for USC, I think Oregon was the better team. Really, it comes down to defense. USC couldn't stop a car with a complete roadblock, and Oregon just looks great on both sides of the ball. Close game against Washington is the only thing holding them from an undefeated season right now. And I think that Oregon's the better team overall. They're at home. I think they come away with the win.
Slade is going to go with the Ducks as well, and of course, I'm going to pick my boys. But for me, I mean, obviously, firing Alex Grinch is I don't think you can get any worse than what he was doing there. But that USC defense is the biggest question. I think this can easily turn into an offensive shootout. Oregon needs to get a couple stops to be able to pull away from USC. But this being the late game, Pac-12, I've been saying it all year. It's probably annoying to everybody else at this point, but Pac-12 after dark produces a lot of interesting results, and so it'll be very curious to see how everything will shake out. But Oregon fans are a little too confident on Twitter for my liking. They're already making plans for playing Washington and Vegas. I've been around this too long to count my chickens before they hatch. We're we have a rough November schedule. We have USC at Arizona State, and I've been saying this all season as well. Um, Going to the desert late in the season has always kind of been our Achilles heel. So I'm not holding my breath until the final whistle blows against Oregon State, and we know we're going to play whoever in Las Vegas. So just a word to the wise of for Oregon fans on Twitter, maybe just relax a little bit. That's all I'm asking for here. Now to make our picks for the game of the week, Ole Miss at Georgia, 7 o'clock on ESPN. Huge matchup. Again, Georgia, if they win, they clinch the SEC East, punch your ticket to Atlanta. Ole Miss, they need to win, and they need Alabama to find 2 more losses the rest of the season to get to Atlanta. But this can still, even without going to Atlanta, this can still kind of make their case for possibly making the college football playoff, depending on what happens. So, Nick, who do you got in this one?
Yeah, I got Georgia. These are the kind of games like I wish I could give Ole Miss more credit here, but these are the kind of games that Ole Miss, like you mentioned earlier, just fails to show up to. They don't necessarily play completely terrible, but I look back to that Alabama game. We all talked about it. That was their best chance to beat Alabama that they've gotten uh, as long as I can remember, at least while Alabama's been good, and they fumbled it. I think that they had the momentum and they had the team to go to Alabama and win, and they just didn't show up. The box score didn't show the whole story of that game, and I think that Georgia. If there's one thing we've seen from Georgia, even if at the beginning of the season they didn't look like a possible. I mean, some people thought they did. I didn't think at the beginning of the season they looked like a possible three-peat contender, but now they do, and I think that they're just gonna walk into their home stadium and just show Ole Miss how you show up to big SEC games. Ole Miss is not going to be ready for it. I think Georgia takes it.
Slade is going to go with the Bulldogs as well. And I just can't in good conscience pick against Georgia at home. Again, Ole Miss has shown, under Lane Kiffin, has shown a tendency to not be able to show up for these big games. So I definitely have a lot of questions around this Ole Miss team. And Jackson Dart, obviously, he has the potential to be one of the best quarterbacks, but can he carry that over week? And this Ole Miss defense just gives me way too many concerns to, again, in good conscience, pick them with the momentum that Georgia has picked up the last couple of weeks. So I'm going to go with the Bulldogs at home. So those are our Week 11 picks. I can't believe we're this far into the season already. But that'll wrap up this week's edition of Out of the Tunnel. As always, we can't thank you guys enough for joining us on every Saturday morning. We will be back next week and get you guys ready for Week 12 as well. Slade will be back. He's finally home from Mexico. He's just working today. So shout out to his work for making him work. Yeah, that made sense. Anyway, we will see you guys in the next video. Have a great rest of your day.